The titanium in Jin Hyuk's soul was forged by a lifetime of violence, making him immune to love, until the night he saw Isla, his enemy's fiancée, and realized a single woman could burn his whole empire down. Jin Hyuk sat in his fortress, the 65th floor office, a cold cathedral of power. Everything was black glass, steel, and a silence so profound it felt like a burial. The only light came from the city laid out below him, a carpet of trivial lights he owned but never touched. At 35, he was the undisputed boss of the Cheonghua Syndicate, his reputation built on control of the markets, control of his subordinates, and absolute control of his own emotions. He saw love as a liability, a chemical weakness that had cost his father everything. His posture, always rigid, reflected the iron rule of his inner world. He ran a finger across the polished mahogany of his desk, the only warmth in the room, and thought of his rival, a man named Kim. Kim was gaining ground, and Jin Hyuk's loneliness, a dull, constant ache, was his only emotional companion. 2 miles away, Isla stood in a traditional Korean haynock, the air thick with the scent of jasmine and new silk. She was trying on her wedding attire, the brilliant colors feeling like an elaborate, suffocating lie. Her dark skin and vibrant presence were a stark contrast to the quiet, ancient formality of the house Kim had chosen for her. Isla was not a woman of resignation. Her boldness was a quiet, inner flame. But right now, it was guttering. She was marrying Kim not for love, but for a promise of protection for her people back in Lagos, a deal she had brokered with the devil. She forced a smile for the tailor, her hands folded tightly in her lap, focusing on the duty that superseded her own heart. The life she was stepping into was gilded, but the cage was solid. What drives someone to make a sacrifice like that? She thought, watching her reflection, the beautiful trapped woman Kim had acquired. Back in the tower, Jin Hyuk's chief strategist, Min, broke the silence. Sir, the intelligence report on Kim's upcoming nuptials. A strategic marriage, they say. Her name is Isla. She's unconventional. Min slid a high-resolution photo across the desk. Jin Hyuk barely glanced at it, ready to dismiss it as a mere asset. But when his gaze finally settled on the image, Isla smiling faintly, her eyes holding an ocean of complicated strength, the titanium shell around his heart developed a hairline fracture. He felt an unwelcome, dizzying spike of interest. The air in the room, usually sterile, suddenly felt charged, demanding him to look again. This woman was not a pawn. She was something he had never faced. Before we dive into the explosive meeting between Jin Hyuk and Isla, tell me what you think of our two protagonists. Which character's emotional struggle are you most invested in right now? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for the next part of this crazy story. The next day, the sterile air of the Grand Millennium Hotel negotiation suite was thick with ozone and suppressed violence. Jin Hyuk and Kim, along with their respective retinues, were meeting ostensibly to discuss territorial boundaries, but the true agenda was to see which boss would crack first. Jin Hyuk was poised and silent, letting his intimidation fill the room. Kim was verbose, his confidence edged with arrogance. Isla was present, seated behind Kim, a silent, breathtaking figure in a tailored charcoal suit. Her expression neutral, her mind a calculator. Jin Hyuk had tried to ignore her presence, but the sharp angles of her jaw, the way she observed every man in the room, demanded his attention. The negotiation quickly devolved into a stalemate over control of the Busan docks. Kim, losing patience, slammed his fist on the table, declaring the discussion over. Your terms are unacceptable, Jin Hyuk. We conclude here. This was the moment. Jin Hyuk was about to execute his pre-planned response, a financially devastating market leak, when Isla quietly cleared her throat. Every eye snapped to her, especially Jin Hyuk's. Her interruption was a stunning act of defiance. She spoke to Kim, but her voice, low, rich, and utterly composed, was directed at the room. The terms are illogical, not unacceptable, sir. If we analyze the Q3 shipping manifests, Busan is projected to shift $70 million in high-risk cargo, not the $55 million Jin Hyuk's team calculated. She didn't apologize for interrupting. She simply laid out her facts, detailing a specific, highly confidential logistical shift that both bosses had missed. A heavy, dangerous silence descended. Kim looked furious, yet momentarily paralyzed by her accuracy. Jin Hyuk didn't care about the extra $15 million in cargo. He was mesmerized by her sheer, unyielding boldness. She had walked into a room full of wolves and corrected the pack leader. She finally looked directly at Jin Hyuk, not with fear or flirtation, but with a challenge. A pure intellectual recognition of his equal caliber. In that shared gaze, time stretched. Jin Hyuk felt a violent, visceral jolt. A feeling of being utterly seen that he hadn't experienced since he was a child. It was a terrifying breach in his armor. Kim finally recovered, his face tight with anger he quickly masked. Isla's input is noted, a minor calculation error. He dismissed her with a wave of his hand. Jin Hyuk, however, was unable to speak, his perfectly crafted response forgotten. The air felt charged, and he realized he wasn't looking at a rival's asset. He was looking at a singularity, a woman who defied the rules of his dark world. He wanted to reject her existence, to destroy the sudden, terrifying hope she represented. But the image of her defiant eyes was already burned into his memory. He left the room without a word, the meeting forgotten. The only thing remaining was the seismic shock of their connection. The moment Jin Hyuk returned to his fortress, the titanium shell slammed shut, thicker and harder than before. He felt rage, but it wasn't directed at Kim. It was directed inward, at the unexpected surge of weakness Isla had triggered. He ordered men to compile a dossier on her, not just her financials and family connections, but her habits, her history, her deepest motivations. He rationalized it as pure strategic necessity. To understand Kim's greatest asset was to find his greatest weakness. She's a calculating woman who knows the price of information, Jin Hyuk insisted to himself, his voice cold and devoid of inflection. He tried to define the dangerous flutter in his chest as tactical interest, nothing more. Yet his gaze kept returning to the blurry stills captured from the negotiation room, her composed face, the defiant line of her shoulders. Meanwhile, Isla was facing the quiet fury of Kim. He didn't raise his voice, which was worse. He praised her intelligence in a tone that stripped the word of all flattery. Your insight was sharp, Jagiya, but you must remember your place. My fiancée does not debate logistics with my rivals. She supports me. He placed a possessive hand on her shoulder, heavy, lingering, and she subtly felt the weight of her duty pressed down on her. The warmth she had felt under Jin Hyuk's challenging gaze now felt like a dangerous fantasy. Isla tried to push the boss out of her mind. He was danger wrapped in expensive silk, the very embodiment of the life she was sacrificing herself to endure. Focusing on the practicalities of her pact, she told herself the electric moment in the meeting was just the high-stakes adrenaline of the underworld. She was a pragmatist. She had a family to protect, a future to secure. Kim's stability, however controlling, was a tangible shield. Jin Hyuk was chaos, a fleeting spark that threatened to incinerate the protective barrier she was building. But the resistance was failing. One evening, alone in her room, Isla found herself sketching the geometric patterns of the hotel's carpet, only for the lines to morph into the sharp, angular profile of Jin Hyuk's face as he stared at her across the table. She crumpled the paper, her breath catching in a silent, desperate effort to cling to her commitment. She knew that if she allowed herself to feel anything for the man who was Kim's rival, the delicate structure of her sacrifice would collapse, putting everyone she loved in a deadly peril. The external conflict was between two syndicates. The internal war was Isla's heart versus her honor. The danger wasn't Jin Hyuk's power, but his ability to make her question everything. A week later, disaster struck. Not the anticipated gang warfare, but a catastrophic security breach. A sophisticated cyber attack traced to neither Jin Hyuk nor Kim, suggesting a dangerous third party, crippled both their critical communication networks simultaneously. Trust between the rivals dissolved instantly. In the chaos, both syndicates independently designated the same remote, heavily fortified subterranean bunker outside the city as their emergency command center. They had to cooperate or risk total exposure. Jin Hyuk arrived first, his face a mask of stone, already dissecting the attack vectors. He was enraged by the lack of control. When Kim's security detail arrived, Isla was with them, not merely as a decorative fiancée, but as the only one who had the necessary technical expertise to analyze the encrypted threat code. Kim had dragged her into the center of the storm. Jin Hyuk met her eyes across the cold, concrete expanse of the bunker. The atmosphere was immediately electrified, thicker than the tension of the crisis itself. They were forced to sit across a narrow steel table, surrounded by paranoid, armed men, both pretending the other was merely a chair or a monitor. For 48 hours they worked, Jin Hyuk demanding information, Isla providing flawless analysis. Their dialogue was clinical, sharp, and entirely professional, yet loaded with overwhelming subtext. The firewall penetration indicates an insider with high-level clearance, Jin Hyuk stated, his voice a low rumble. Isla countered, her fingers flying across a holographic display. No, Jin Hyuk, see, the pattern is too clean. This is an orchestrated ghost attack, designed to look like betrayal. It's professional misdirection. Every interaction was a sparring match, revealing their mental synchronization and mirroring intelligence. Jin Hyuk started observing her small, unintentional gestures, the brief flicker of irritation when Kim undermined her, the subtle tremor in her hand after hours without sleep. He saw her composure as a burden she carried, not a weapon she wielded. That night, during a brief, mandatory lull, Jin Hyuk found Isla alone in a smaller annex, staring at a schematic. "Why are you doing this?" Jin Hyuk asked, the question escaping him before he could smother it. It wasn't about the code. It was about the sacrifice. Isla didn't look up, maintaining the professional facade, but her voice held a raw edge. "I'm ensuring my security, boss." "You are ensuring a gilded death," he corrected, stepping closer. The air compressed around them. They were reluctant, unable to separate, bound by an invisible, dangerous cord. And the deeper, terrifying emotion that was surfacing was the realization that they understood each other's prisons perfectly. The crisis deepened, forcing the two rival teams to work through the night. Isla, exhausted, took a moment of respite in the small, makeshift break area. Jin Hyuk watched her go, then followed, driven by an urgent need he couldn't name. He found her sitting quietly, nursing a cold cup of tea. She had laid her small, worn leather journal on the table beside her, perhaps as a cushion for her wrist. He didn't mean to look, but his eyes snagged on a detailed, intimate sketch drawn in the journal's margin. It was a precise rendering of the hanok where she was currently staying, but the perspective was different, more distant, depicting the house set against a towering, rugged mountain range, a landscape he immediately recognized. It was the backdrop of his own childhood home, before the syndicate's internal betrayal had shattered his family and forced him into his current path. It was an impossible coincidence. Jin Hyuk felt the air leave his lungs. "Where did you see that view?" he asked, his voice rough, abandoning all pretense of professional detachment. Isla flinched, quickly covering the journal. She hesitated, her defenses momentarily shattered by the urgency in his tone. That is not Seoul. It is the sketch of a place I lived when I was young during a diplomatic crisis. A safe house? My mother used to paint it. She died there." The memory was painful, raw. The truth solidified for Jin Hyuk. His father had temporarily exiled his family to that exact rural location for their protection, a location known only to a handful of old, trusted associates, just before the ambush that claimed his sister. Isla's mother had been there too. Their painful histories were tangled, connected by the same dark web of political violence. Seeing his disbelief, Isla leaned forward, her eyes pleading. "You want to know why I'm marrying Kim? It's not for status, Jin Hyuk. The resources Kim controls are the only thing keeping my family and the community I left behind safe from another boss who threatens us. Kim promised protection. I am trading my life for theirs." The secret, heavy truth, the foundation of her sacrifice, was finally spoken aloud. Jin Hyuk stared, the ruthlessness melting away to reveal the trapped boy beneath. She wasn't just Kim's asset, she was a hostage who chose her own cage out of altruism. The conflict intensified. His growing love was no longer just a betrayal of his power, but a direct threat to the very people Isla was trying to save. Their connection strengthened under the weight of these hidden, tragic truths, creating a desperate loyalty that transcended the bunker's sterile walls. The cost of pursuing her was no longer just his empire, but her entire world. This revelation changes everything. Isla is making the ultimate sacrifice for love, but not for Jin Hyuk. Do you think it's possible for a forbidden connection to survive this level of danger and duty? Let us know your predictions in the comments, and subscribe to see if they can escape their fate. The unspoken truth hung between them, heavy and fragile, like a priceless artifact on the verge of shattering. They were two traumatized souls who had both chosen lives of extreme control. Jin Hyuk through violence, Isla through sacrifice. The realization that they shared a common backdrop of loss, even if separated by years, broke the ice that had encased their professional dynamic. The bunker, usually a chamber of paranoia, became a temporary, dangerous sanctuary. The crisis outside still raged, but inside, during the midnight shift when most of the bodyguards were dozing or distracted, they found a moment of quiet refuge. Isla was tracing the lines of the old family landscape sketch again. Jin Hyuk sat beside her, closer than he should have. The scent of her jasmine-infused perfume, a dizzying contrast to the stale air. "Why the violence, Jin Hyuk?" Isla asked softly, finally using his given name instead of his title. "When you are so clearly capable of building, why choose to destroy?" His jaw tightened, a muscle jumping in his cheek. He had never explained this to anyone, not even his closest advisors. "Building requires trust," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "And trust is the weakest foundation. When my sister died, betrayed by a man my father trusted, I learned that only fear and absolute control are real. Love is a luxury you cannot afford when you have enemies." He paused, looking away, ashamed of the vulnerability he had just shown. "I became the monster so the monster wouldn't get to me first." Isla gently reached out, her fingers hovering near his clenched fist, but she didn't touch him. "And you think living without feeling makes you safe? You're not a monster, Jin Hyuk. You're a man in a cage he forged himself." She then spoke of her home, of the vibrant colors and loud laughter, the communal bond that made her sacrifice bearable. She spoke of her fear not of death, but of forgetting what warmth felt like. A heavy silence followed, but it was a shared silence, one of deep, mutual understanding. For the first time, Jin Hyuk saw beyond the strategic advantage and the lethal games. He saw a life where that silence could be filled with the sound of her voice, a life where he could finally lay down the weight of control. He closed his eyes, inhaling the scent of jasmine and steel. He opened his hand, turning his palm up, an undeniable non-verbal invitation. Isla hesitated for only a second, then placed her hand in his. The contact was fragile, real, and electric, feeling like the first moment of safety either of them had known in decades. Healing was possible, but the world outside their shared bubble was waiting to tear them apart. The brief, fragile bond forged in the sterile quiet of the bunker was doomed the moment the doors opened. The cyber threat had been neutralized, trust was supposedly restored, and both parties returned to their formal roles. But Kim, the rival boss, had seen the change in Isla's eyes, a subtle, softening light that had never been there before. He had also intercepted a coded communication from Jin Hyuk's camp, a simple delivery request that was too geographically specific to be accidental. Kim confirmed his suspicions. The connection was real, and it was a direct threat to his power and his ego. Kim decided to move immediately, orchestrating a meeting under the guise of a formal peace treaty celebration, insisting that both Jin Hyuk and Isla attend. The setting was ostentatious, a penthouse reception where the city's elite, both legitimate and underworld, were gathered. The tension in the air was suffocating, masked only by the clinking of champagne flutes. Kim, seizing the opportunity, raised a toast to his future fiancée, pulling Isla close with a possessive arm that pressed painfully against her ribs. Then, his voice smooth and cold, he shifted the focus, subtly alluding to Jin Hyuk's alleged distraction during the cyber crisis. Kim revealed highly personal classified details about the Cheonghua Syndicate's internal affairs, details only a betrayer could know, details that Jin Hyuk had only shared with Isla during their private, vulnerable moment. "Perhaps Jin Hyuk see," Kim purred, his smile predatory. "You made the mistake of sharing state secrets with a woman who understands leverage better than loyalty. After all, she is the reason we exposed the weakness in your security." The accusation was a lie, but the circumstantial evidence was damning. Jin Hyuk was instantly trapped. To deny it meant war and guaranteeing Kim would destroy Isla's family as retribution. He had to choose between his empire's survival and confirming Isla's faith in him. Jin Hyuk looked at Isla, whose eyes were wide with terror and pleading honesty. He hardened his heart, drawing on a lifetime of cultivated cruelty. His voice was clinical, ringing clearly across the shocked silence of the room. "The only mistake I made was wasting time on a small-time operative who attempted to play both sides for personal gain. Ms. Isla is an excellent analyst, but a predictable woman. Her efforts to seduce me for information failed. I have no use for a liar, especially one who confuses business with sentiment." The words were a physical assault. Isla's entire world collapsed. The safety they had found in Act 6 was exposed as a brutal, calculated deception. Her face went pale, her eyes welling with the sting of utter betrayal. She realized he hadn't just rejected her. He had destroyed the protective lie she had built her sacrifice upon. She was alone, humiliated, and now entirely in Kim's power. Jin Hyuk watched her heart break, feeling a searing, unbearable pain, the cost of saving her life by sacrificing his own soul. The brief, fragile bond forged in the sterile quiet of the bunker was doomed the moment the doors opened. The cyber threat had been neutralized, trust was supposedly restored, and both parties returned to their formal roles. But Kim, the rival boss, had seen the change in Isla's eyes, a subtle, softening light that had never been there before. He had also intercepted a coded communication from Jin Hyuk's camp, a simple delivery request that was too geographically specific to be accidental. Kim confirmed his suspicions. The connection was real, and it was a direct threat to his power and his ego. Kim decided to move immediately, orchestrating a meeting under the guise of a formal peace treaty celebration, insisting that both Jin Hyuk and Isla attend. The setting was ostentatious, a penthouse reception where the city's elite, both legitimate and underworld, were gathered. The tension in the air was suffocating, masked only by the clinking of champagne flutes. Kim, seizing the opportunity, raised a toast to his future fiancée, pulling Isla close with a possessive arm that pressed painfully against her ribs. Then, his voice smooth and cold, he shifted the focus, subtly alluding to Jin Hyuk's alleged distraction during the cyber crisis. Kim revealed highly personal, classified details about the Cheonghua Syndicate's internal affairs, details only a betrayer could know, details that Jin Hyuk had only shared with Isla during their private, vulnerable moment. "Perhaps, Jin Hyuk see," Kim purred, his smile predatory. "You made the mistake of sharing state secrets with a woman who understands leverage better than loyalty. After all, she is the reason we exposed the weakness in your security." The accusation was a lie, but the circumstantial evidence was damning. Jin Hyuk was instantly trapped. To deny it meant war and guaranteeing Kim would destroy Isla's family as retribution. He had to choose between his empire's survival and confirming Isla's faith in him. Jin Hyuk looked at Isla, whose eyes were wide with terror and pleading honesty. He hardened his heart, drawing on a lifetime of cultivated cruelty. His voice was clinical, ringing clearly across the shocked silence of the room. "The only mistake I made was wasting time on a small-time operative who attempted to play both sides for personal gain. Ms. Isla is an excellent analyst, but a predictable woman. Her efforts to seduce me for information failed. I have no use for a liar, especially one who confuses business with sentiment." The words were a physical assault. Isla's entire world collapsed. The safety they had found in Act 6 was exposed as a brutal, calculated deception. Her face went pale, her eyes welling with the sting of utter betrayal. She realized he hadn't just rejected her. He had destroyed the protective lie she had built her sacrifice upon. She was alone, humiliated, and now entirely in Kim's power. Jin Hyuk watched her heart break, feeling a searing, unbearable pain, the cost of saving her life by sacrificing his own soul. Isla was immediately isolated, returned to Kim's haynock, now stripped of its elegance and feeling like a true prison cell. The wedding was fast-tracked, an act of cold vengeance by Kim to finalize his possession and publicly humiliate Jin Hyuk. Isla moved through the preparations numbly, the devastating finality of Jin Hyuk's denunciation echoing in her mind. He was right. She was foolish for believing a man of violence could ever choose vulnerability. She clung only to the original sacrifice, her family's safety, which was now the only thing left tethering her to this nightmare. Meanwhile, Jin Hyuk was alone in his tower, the silence heavier and more absolute than ever before. He had saved her life, but the cost was unbearable. He stared at the empty chair where she had sat during their shared crisis, the ghost of their quiet conversations mocking his solitude. He knew the syndicate was secured, his power preserved, but the victory felt meaningless, toxic. He had chosen control over connection, and the truth of his barren existence was now undeniable. He was the boss of nothing. His advisors presented him with the final strategic plans to launch an attack that would destroy Kim, regain market share, and erase the embarrassment. Jin Hyuk pushed the files away. He knew that path. It was the path of vengeance, endless violence, and continued solitude. He had a choice: continue the cycle of violence that had defined him, or embrace the terrifying, vulnerable truth Isla had shown him. He realized the irony. The only way to genuinely protect Isla and his own soul was to destroy the one thing he had spent his life building: his reputation for cold, absolute control. Love, he finally understood, wasn't a liability. It was the only thing worth fighting for. Isla, folding the last of her childhood clothes into a trunk Kim had provided, found a small, expertly folded piece of paper tucked inside her worn leather journal, the one she had used for the sketch. It wasn't a grand declaration. It was just a single, precise line of Korean text written in Jin Hyuk's sharp, distinctive hand. The safe house is temporary. The path out is not. It was a cryptic warning, a lifeline, and most importantly, an echo of their past conversation and his realization that she was a prisoner. He wasn't telling her to run to him, but simply to run. Isla's numbness instantly evaporated, replaced by a fierce, desperate surge of hope and realization. He hadn't betrayed her. He had bought her time. Now the choice was hers. She could cling to the faint safety of Kim's regime and the promise of protection for her family, or risk everything on a dangerous, single word from the man she loved, choosing truth over fear. The wedding was tomorrow. The reckoning was now. The wedding day arrived, an obscenely lavish display of power and coerced union held in Kim's private, heavily guarded estate. Isla, dressed in a stunning ceremonial gown, walked the aisle with the controlled grace of a condemned queen. She was surrounded by Kim's power, but beneath her outward calm, the single line from Jin Hyuk burned bright, focusing her resolve. She had made her choice: vulnerability over survival. As the official began the pronouncement, the massive doors of the hall were thrown open, not with the explosive violence Kim expected, but with a quiet, devastating force. Jin Hyuk stood framed in the doorway, dressed not in his usual aggressive suit, but in muted, understated clothing that somehow made him appear more lethal. He was alone, having arrived without his usual contingent, an act of intentional, bewildering weakness designed to disarm Kim's paranoia. The ceremony ground to a halt. Kim snarled, signaling his guards. "You dare intrude on sacred ground, Jin Hyuk? I'll end you here." Jin Hyuk ignored the threat, his eyes fixed only on Isla. He walked slowly toward her, every step a painful rejection of his own past. He reached the altar, standing toe-to-toe with Kim, but addressed his rival with a cold, definitive clarity. "I am not here for war, Kim. The rivalry ends today." He lowered his voice, the sound carrying only to the three of them. "You sought to own a woman who is defined by her freedom. You sought to use her duty as leverage, but you do not understand what she truly values." Jin Hyuk turned to Isla, his gaze filled with the agonizing honesty he had long denied. He repeated the phrase she had used in the bunker, the one that broke his heart when he had to deny her. "You are not a monster, Isla. You are a woman in a cage she forged herself, and I am here to tear that cage down." He then looked back at Kim, presenting his final ultimatum. "She is not your asset. She is her own free will. You may proceed with this farce, but if you do, the consequence will not be war. It will be the immediate, silent collapse of every deal, every connection, and every false promise you have made. You will keep your life, Kim, but you will lose everything else, starting now." Jin Hyuk placed his hand out, a simple, open gesture toward Isla. "The choice is yours, Isla. Duty or truth." Isla did not hesitate. Her smile, for the first time, was real, a fierce, radiant burst of freedom. She took 2 deliberate steps, leaving Kim and the entire dark world behind. She slipped her hand into Jin Hyuk's, and the gesture sealed their fate. They walked out of the hall not running, but walking with the quiet, devastating power of 2 people who had chosen love over a kingdom. Jin Hyuk had sacrificed the perception of control to gain the only thing that mattered: a vulnerable, authentic life with the woman who saw past his monster and found his soul. They left the city that defined their darkness, choosing a new path of shared courage. The war ended not with a bullet, but with a choice. We've reached the end of their incredible journey. Jin Hyuk chose love over his empire, and Isla chose freedom over duty. What did you think was the most emotionally powerful moment of this entire story? Let us know in the comments below, and if you loved this emotional drama, make sure to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss our next video.